Rules Committee come to order, and thank you very much for joining us today. Today, the Rules Committee will consider H.R. 1734, the Improving Coal Combustion Residues Act of 2015, and H.R. 1599, the Safe, Accurate Food Labeling Act of 2015. H.R. 1734 provides for safe management and disposal of coal ash in a manner that preserves jobs and encourages reuse of coal ash materials. This bill would authorize states to immediately implement coal ash permit programs, and estimates project that this legislation would protect over 300,000 American jobs. H.R. 1599 is a free market solution to the existing patchwork system of varying food labeling requirements that interfere with the free flow of goods in the marketplace. This bill would help give consumers access to meaningful information where their food came from and create a regulatory process to ensure the safety of genetically engineered products. I want to thank Chairman John Shimkus, a member of my class, a guy I've looked up to now for 19 years as a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, who is doing an awesome job in his role as subcommittee chairman of the Environment and the Economy, and for his leadership on H.R. 1734. It's always good to have an Army veteran with us, a graduate of the United States Military Academy, and we welcome Chairman Shimkus. With him today is also the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, who I expect to be arriving shortly. I want to welcome both of you to the Rules Committee. I'd also like to note today is a big day in the life of our staff director, who's nowhere to be seen, so we'll be nice to him. Hugh Halperin, celebration number 41 today, and congratulations to Hugh Halperin for that. With that said, that's my opening statement. Gentlemen, Massachusetts seek recognition.
I have nothing nice to say about two bills, but I will say happy birthday to Hugh.
Yeah, so Hugh, it's pretty big stuff.
With that, I yield back my time.
Pretty cool. Great. Well, we will make sure that we get even with Hugh when we see him. I'm sure you'll have that opportunity as we move on during the day. Mr. Shimkus, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to please come on up to the witness table. Thank you very much for joining us. I believe the gentleman knows that we count on him to come to this committee with great information that we can count on that helps us know about the continuing efforts to create and protect jobs in this country. And certainly this is not a new issue to us. We're aware of it, but I think it's important that you're here. Anything you have in writing, our awesome stenographer is with us today, one of my favorites, and so let's help her out all we can. If you'll leave anything you have in writing, I appreciate it. And the gentleman, please remember that green button needs to be on. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleagues on both sides of the aisle, it's great to be here. And Mr. McGovern, you are my classmate, too. You could have at least said that.
And I like you, too. I should have said that, too. Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to testify today on H.R. 1734, Improving Coal Combustion Residuals Regulation Act of 2015. I'm pleased to represent the Committee on Energy and Commerce, which favorably reported H.R. 1734 by a margin of almost 2-to-1. H.R. 1734 is a bipartisan legislation that addresses the major problems with EPA's final rule for coal ash that was published in the Federal Register in April and will become effective in October of this year. The flaws in the final rule are that it is self-implementing, meaning that there will be no regulatory oversight. The fact that if states implement permit programs that incorporate the final rule, the state requirements will not operate in lieu of the federal rule. So regulated entities must comply with two sets of requirements. Then the only mechanism for enforcement of the final rule is through citizen suits, which would result in an unpredictable array of regulatory interpretations as judges throughout the country are forced to make technical compliance decisions that are better left to a regulatory agency. Let me give you an example of the problem. The final rule says that the owner or operator of a CCR unit, a coal combustion residual unit, must install a groundwater monitoring system that consists of a sufficient number of wells installed at the appropriate locations and depths to yield groundwater samples from the uppermost aquifer that accurately represents the quality of background groundwater that has not been affected by leakage from the CCR unit. The utilities must interpret what that means, again, with no involvement from the regulatory agency, and they must determine what is a quote-unquote sufficient number of wells and what the, and I quote again, appropriate locations and depths, close quote, might be. You can guess that there are plenty of environmental advocacy groups that are going to disagree with whatever the utilities decide about the number, location, and depth of the wells. Let's say the utilities decide to use a monitoring well arrangement that has 15 wells down gradient of coal ash disposal unit. An advocacy group could say that the quote-unquote sufficient number is not 15 down gradient wells, but rather 30 wells, and that the utility should have put in well 25 feet wells to the left and made it 5 feet deeper. But because the utility didn't do so, I am taking them to court. Instead of having the state environmental agency that has engineering and hydrological expertise analyze the site-specific conditions at the disposal unit to determine how many monitoring wells and at what location and depth are necessary in order to determine whether the unit is having an impact on groundwater. We are going to leave that decision in the hands of a federal judge. Another example could be in an arid western state like Arizona. The rule requires liners be comprised of 2 feet of compacted soil. However, in arid states, unless there is moisture in the soil, it will dry out and crack and will not be an effective barrier for the waste. So in the hypothetical permit program, Arizona could leave out the requirement liners must have 2 feet of compacted soil. Again, the advocacy group could say, I don't like that liners in Arizona won't have 2 feet of compacted soil as EPA specified in the final rule. Because in drafting the final rule, EPA did not have authority to ensure that state permit programs operate in lieu of the final rule, even if utilities in Arizona have a valid state permit and that liners and their disposal units comply with all the terms of that permit. A citizen suit could be filed against the utilities for not complying with EPA's requirement that liners have 2 feet of compacted soil. Because of all the requirements of the final rule are still separately federally enforceable requirements. So to solve these problems, we developed a legislative solution that does 2 things. First, it takes into account all the hard work EPA put into developing sound technical standards that are protective of human health and environment. And second, utilizes the framework developed in previous legislation requiring states to develop enforceable permit programs that will contain minimum federal standards that directly incorporate the requirements of the final rule. Every permit program will address inactive surface impoundments or legacy sites in the same manner as EPA dealt with them in the final rule. They must be closed by a deadline or they will be regulated like any other active disposal unit. The bill does not in any way impact the ability to bring citizen suits, and while the legislation does not require owners and operators to post their operating records on the internet because that is a remnant of self-implementing program, it does require states to ensure that information be made available on the internet. Some say the bill goes too far because it allows states to exercise flexibility and make site-specific risk-based decisions. Others say the bill is a giveaway to the utilities, or that allowing the states to exercise the same flexibility available under other RCRA permit programs weakens the requirements of the final rule. To that, we say H.R. 1734 simply gives the states the same authority to implement coal ash permit programs as they have in other RCRA Subtitle D and even Subtitle C permit programs. We trust that the states are in the best position to analyze the local conditions and make risk-based permit decisions. We also know that EPA trusts that the states develop. EPA relies on the states for the implementation and enforcement of RCRA. And as we have heard repeatedly from the Environmental Council of the States and the Association of State and Territorial Solid Waste Management Officials, states welcome the new minimum federal standards and are up to the task in regulating coal ash. H.R. 1734 is supported by a unique group of stakeholders. Unique because you don't usually have state environmental agencies on the same side of an issue as the utility industry. But the states are very supportive of 1738, and we also have very strong support from the Environmental Council of the States and the Association of State and Territorial Solid Waste Management Officials, the Western governors, and the beneficial users community. Last but not least, we have the support of the utility industry, and we have a letter from the Utility Solid Waste Activities Group, the Edison Electric Institute, the National Rural Electric Co-ops, and the American Public Power Association, in which they point out that H.R. 1734 will accomplish what EPA could not in the CCR rule. By replacing the inefficient and unprecedented self-implementation requirement with a state-based permit program, reviewed by EPA, Congress will assure that CCR rule is implemented in a consistent, coherent, and effective manner with public participation in individual permit decisions. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the committee on behalf of H.R. 1734. Mr.
Chairman
Chairman.
Shimkus, thank you very much. Ms. Tonko, we're delighted that you're with us. Just a few seconds ago, we welcomed you to the committee. There was a statement made, and I'd like to repeat it, that anything you have in writing to give to our awesome stenographer would be in her best interest. It would be very helpful, and I want to thank you very much. If you'll please make sure your green light is on. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to join at the table with my friend, the chair of our subcommittee, John Shimkus. And Chair Sessions, and to our ranking member Slaughter and members of the committee, I'm here this afternoon to discuss H.R. 1734, the Improving Coal Combustion Residuals Act. The Democrats on the Energy and Commerce Committee would prefer this legislation to be considered under an open rule. If the committee does not support H.R. 1734's consideration under an open rule, I ask that the committee make all the amendments submitted by Democratic members to the Rules Committee be made in order under the rule for the bill. In the 35 years since Congress passed the Resource Reuse and Recovery Act, or RCRA, the Environmental Protection Agency has been studying the issue of coal ash disposal. It has been and continues to be the subject of intense debate. During this same time, communities in many states have experienced serious problems related to improper disposal of coal ash. Spills resulting from coal ash impoundment failures have polluted water supplies, have destroyed private and public property, and have most egregiously resulted in lengthy and expensive cleanup efforts. The residents of these unfortunate communities know that action on this issue is long overdue. Earlier this year, the Environmental Protection Agency's final rule to strengthen the regulations on the disposal of coal ash was published in the Federal Register. This rule was in development for many years and is the result of an extensive public process. The rule represents a compromise amongst the stakeholders in this issue, and so it is not surprising that there are those who are unhappy with certain provisions of the rule. But I do believe that the rule should move forward. I realize that some members of the House prefer the approach taken in H.R. 1734, but this legislation offers for weaker protections than those of EPA's final rule. We have had 35 years of weak protection. It has cost us a great deal, and it is indeed time for a more rigorous and stringent approach that prevents spills, prevents water pollution, prevents air pollution, and prevents exposures to toxic substances. The amendments submitted to the Rules Committee would improve the bill and strengthen public health provisions. My colleagues have submitted constructive amendments addressing important issues, such as ensuring transparency in disposal facility operations, post-closure requirements and drinking water protections, and groundwater monitoring. These are all important issues, especially to the communities that host these facilities, that are worthy of consideration by all members of this House. Again, I ask that all members of the House have an opportunity to offer amendments to H.R. 1734. An open rule would be the best way to ensure this. If an open rule is not granted, I respectfully request that amendments submitted to the Rules Committee earlier today be made in order. And with that, I thank you for your kind attention and your consideration.
Mr. Tonko, thank you very much. Kind of to answer a little bit of question or an answer back to you, we're hoping to do one of those two items. One of those two requests.
Okay, well, we would hope that there's an effort made full-fledged to improve the measure.
Well, you just asked for one of two things, and so I'm going to try and do one of the two. Mr. Shimkus, the gentleman referred to the EPA, and you referred to states. The states are behind this bill. They feel that's the best interest for them to take further the steps. It gives them the authority and the responsibility is this another battle between the EPA or the federal government and our states and what the states are asking for to do to be able to manage their own land? And I come from Texas. We think we do a better job than anybody else at Texas stuff. We respect people from Illinois, and we do respect even people from Nevada with things that they say. But isn't it true that what you're trying to do here is give every state their own authority, their own responsibility? Please tell me more.
Well, the genesis of the legislation came from the final rule that EPA, that I tried to identify in the opening statement. So what we looked at is how do states manage landfills now?
Right.
And they do it under RCRA. That's, I should have probably mentioned what that terminology is. Solid waste disposal, in which states are in control, states do the permitting, EPA has some oversight. And so that's all we're arranging this piece of legislation to say, what are the national standards set by the EPA? Now, how do we best get the states, obviously, to comply? And they have asked for the ability to do a permitting program, just like they do in other aspects. The other problematic issue is that there really, if you have to rely on citizen suits to adjudicate these coal combustion residual sites, then you're going to have a really bifurcated system of rules and regs set by a federal judge and not by the states themselves.
Good, good. Thank you very much. Mrs. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Chairman Shimkus has done a very good job of explaining the need for this legislation, and I appreciate his coming, and Mr. Tonko also. And I have no questions. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the statement of administration policy, which says if the president were presented with H.R. 1734 as drafted, the senior advisors would recommend that he veto the bill. And then I think that says it all. I have no questions.
Thank you very much. Did the gentleman ask that that be submitted? Without objection, I'll be submitted into the record. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I think that the Statement of Administration Policy does say it all, but I want to ask Mr. Shimkus about it, because what I understood him to say was that the rules as drafted by the EPA, what the President would like to keep, allows for no enforcement by government, but requires the judiciary to do the enforcement. I have to bring a citizen suit to do the enforcement. Where's the enforcement mechanism to keep me safe, as Mr. Tonko has alluded to?
The enforcement mechanism, citizen suits. So as the example I mentioned, if the terms are very vague in the rules. So if you're going to do monitoring wells and you have a coal ash pond, then down, elevation-wise, you put 15 monitoring wells. There's no one to say, yeah, that's good, based upon the geology, based upon the soil samples, based upon the environment, that meets the standard. Then someone could say, no, you should have 30. Well, when there's conflict between law and people trying to comply, where's conflict resolved?
Mr. Tonko, how can that possibly be how can the best mechanism for me to protect the citizens in my community be to require you to bring a lawsuit that will inevitably result in myriad different standards for protection of different communities, but not a single standard of protection that you and I could rely on?
I think what it does is embrace the best technology. And, we're talking about states' rights here, but when it comes to bailing out, when it comes to cleaning up communities and repairing the damage that's ensued, that's a very pricey situation. And I think an ounce of prevention here where you can move forward with a stronger concept that makes certain that communities are protected is the outcome that we should all strive for.
Well, I don't know if you were here when Mr. Shimkus was giving the beginning part of his testimony. I might have misunderstood him, but what I understood him to say is that the regulations as drafted require a 2-foot compacted soil barrier in these situations, and yet my state geologic folks in dry climates would say that's just nonsense. That's going to give us no protection at all. We might need a polyester. We might need any number of petroleum seals. We could use a clay seal, but compacted dirt will do nothing to protect our folks. And yet, that's what the EPA is requiring. It seems to be the opposite of allowing the folks who have responsibility for the safety in localities to lead on this, and in fact, encumbering them. Did I misunderstand that testimony?
I don't think you misunderstood it, but I think, there's always ways to amend up or down a rule that's been established. I think they're asking, for having had this promulgated, to go forward and give it a track record. A lot of work has gone into this, and certainly the efforts are to protect the environment. And if we do not, the cost of recovery is going to be huge, no matter which tax dollars are utilized, and whether or not those would even be enough for remediation.
Yeah, I don't believe you were here when Mr. Shimkus opened, and he said that the EPA had done a lot of work here and had created some really sound standards, done a lot of scientific investigation here that he did not want to let go to waste. And I thought that was worth reiterating, because so often we have this conversation and it's as if we have Democrats who love everything the EPA does and Republicans who hate everything the EPA does. I would argue neither of those things have any truth to them. But I am disappointed, even though the bill passed 2-1 out of committee. I'm disappointed the margin was not higher. It's one thing to legislate in such a haphazard fashion that the administration gets to write all the rules and regulations that determine how our neighbors back home are protected. But it's something else altogether to legislate in such a haphazard way that even the regulators aren't going to make those decisions, and we're now going to pass it to Article 3 to make the decisions about how our folks back home are regulated. I know that the folks back home don't have a lot of confidence in us these days, but I have a lot of respect for my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and I believe we can do it. I don't think we have to kick the can to the administration. I certainly don't think we have to kick the can to the courts. Mr. Shimkus, I appreciate you trying to bring that back to us, to believe that we collectively have something to offer in the name of protecting folks back home. I hope that we will make some amendments in order, because I don't think you would argue that your product is the end-all, be-all of wisdom. That the collective body may have something to add, but it would have been easier to have just let the administration do what the administration wanted to do, which in this case was just to let the courts do whatever the courts wanted to do. But there's a reason the powers was given from the people to the representatives, and not from the people to the regulators and to the courts. And I appreciate this effort to get us to do the job that we're getting paid to do. I thank you for that. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Judge Hastings?
Thank you very much, Dr. Fox, Madam Chair. Gentlemen, do both of you agree that there is a need for safe disposal and management of coal ash?
I think there's a huge requirement for safe disposal.
And I do also.
And do both of you agree that hexavalent, chromium, arsenic, lead, cadmium, mercury, all of those things are residuals are from coal ash in some instances?
Most definitely.
I think in some percentage, I'm going to wait until you ask your next question, because
well, the real question that I have with reference to the proposed legislation is, why are existing impoundments and landfills are not required to make improvements under this bill if they're the ones that are contaminating the water supply? Either of you or both.
well, if I may, I don't want to step over my colleague and friend. We work well together. First of all, you have to understand EPA ruled twice in 1993 and 2000 that coal ash was not toxic. This whole debate came from the genesis of, should coal ash be declared toxic? Because we recycle a lot of coal ash into products, into shingles, into concrete, into a lot of other products. So that's why I was hesitant to answer your question about those others, you know, in small specifics. But the EPA has gone on record saying these aren't toxic sites. And that was the benefit. Mr. Woodall mentioned the benefit of the EPA rule. When they came out with the final rule, they also reaffirmed that it's not toxic. So then it's just a matter of trying to get some national standards on the formation of the coal sites. And then how do you enforce it? So we did, and my colleagues don't agree, but what we tried to do was take the federal standards and have state enforcement ability. And that was, we think it really helped for the EPA to be able to enforce the standards that they set out in the rule. My colleagues disagree, but I'm hesitant to say I'm helping the EPA. You have to understand, but we thought we really tried to do that.
Well, very briefly, you were hesitant to say that, but you're on record as having said that the EPA has been extremely constructive and helpful in their work on the coal ash rule.
Yeah, that's not helpful to me either. That's right.
Well, I read
Guilty as charged.
Oh, okay, Mr. Tonko, do you have any response?
Yeah, I just think that however we can come up with the best outcome, and I think these efforts by the Democrats in the House to make certain that we're offering the best protection for our water supplies, for our communities, is where we're driving with the amendments, and do not want to weaken the rule that was established by EPA.
All right. I thank you both, and I would say to you, Mr. Tonko, when Chairman Sessions told you that they would do one of the two things that you requested, one of the things that you requested was an open rule, I'm making bets that that's not the thing that's going to be accepted, okay?
Yeah, I kind of read that, but didn't want to verbalize it.
Thank you. All right. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Stivers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is to the subcommittee chair. I'm trying to understand what the problem with this bill that creates a uniform process is, because it seems to me that's better than spotty enforcement based on who files a suit in different localities where different judges make different rulings based on their limited knowledge, because these are very technical rules, right?
They're very technical rules, and really the states do this already. They do this with solid waste, in essence, landfills. So they have the experience, they have the expertise, they know the hydrology. I think the example of, you know, a landfill in Illinois versus a landfill in Arizona is very instructive, because the soil types are very, very different, and the amount of rainfall is different. So to have national standards set by codifying the federal rule, and then have the local state EPAs to certify that they're meeting the federal standards. Part of the bill is if they can't certify the federal standards, then they have to go, then the EPA takes jurisdiction, then they weigh in. So we want to give the first crack at the people who are doing it the most, and that's the state EPAs.
So my second question is for Mr. Tonko. You somehow feel comfortable with the existing rule that would allow citizen suits and judges across 50 states to have 50 different interpretations of the rule.
Yep.
Help me understand why.
No. We're talking about weakening the provisions of this rule through the bill before the House.
I'm talking about
1734.
enforcement. There's no enforcement in the rule. It's through citizen suits. Am I reading the rule wrong?
Citizen suits play a big role in this situation, but we're talking about also weakening the standards, and we don't want those provisions to be weakened.
So your focus is more on the standards.
And
sure.
absolutely concerned about the impact on our water supplies, our communities, and on public and private properties.
But if you don't enforce the rule consistently, to me, that's a bigger problem, or appropriately, and I feel like states who do this every day might be in a better position. So maybe your concern is not really about the enforcement, but the enforcement in the bill seems better than what's in the federal rule. Do you disagree with that too, or would it?
I think that the enforcement mechanism that it will be a strong enforcement, and if we weaken the provisions, we're going to see a stronger impact on the outcome simply by that weakening of the provisions, which I think should be our ultimate concern.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, would you like to make any final statements?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Polis. No questions? Mr. Collins? Mr. Byrne?
I'm trying to bear down on that last point we were going through, because if I understand it right, under the Solid Waste Act, the states are presently implementing and providing the regulations in Subtitle D. So they're already doing basically the same thing. Is that true, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Okay. So the way the regulation has been promulgated by the EPA, we're going to instead let the enforcement be done by federal courts that don't have that day-in, day-out experience of providing that sort of oversight and regulation. Is that that's sort of the essence of why the act was put together the way it was?
That's why we moved the legislation.
I'm going back to my experience in federal court, and Judge, I don't have your experience because I was on the other side, but I watched people like Judge Hastings, federal judges, deal with this incredible myriad of things that they have to deal with. I mean, it's everything from drug cases to securities laws to everything. And as good as our federal judges are, and we have some very fine federal judges that have great law clerks working with them that figure this stuff out, this is one more thing we're going to put on the federal court system to have to figure out when we already have state agencies that already have the background to do it. That just seems really curious to me why we would do that. And there will be some inconsistency because federal judges don't always see things the same way. That's why we have courts of appeals, and ultimately the Supreme Court is to bring some uniformity to that. So I see the wisdom of the enforcement part of it. I guess I didn't understand, and maybe there's something in here that I need to go back and read again. I didn't understand that there was any weakening of the EPA regulation. Where is that?
I think it's in the analysis, if you're allowing states to do the permitting, and they're doing it based upon the geological situations of each individual state, that flexibility, I think, is how the opponents define it as weakening.
Oh, so it's not weakening the regulation. The regulation is not being altered by the bill.
The standards are still, we're codifying the federal standards in the rule, but we're allowing the states, based upon the individual aspects and their experience, to define a system to meet the regulations.
But isn't that always the case when you've got somebody that's got to provide the implementation of something? They're going to have to bring some interpretation to it. So you're not giving them any more interpretation than they would have.
No, they've got to meet the standard.
So the standard,
How they do it.
The standard really hasn't been weakened by the bill. It's just how it's going to be enforced.
It's that's our position.
And I want to give the gentleman the chance to respond to that.
Well, I think when you have a patchwork of response or regulation or standard, you are putting at risk the individual communities and states that are impacted as host communities with the coal ash. And I think that, with all the study that has been done over the many years, we should have some sort of standard established that protects the communities and, offers the sort of.
But if we let the federal courts do it, you're going to have a patchwork there. Because you're going to have different federal judges looking at this in different ways and probably wrestling with the same sort of individualized state variances here because of different types of soils, et cetera. So why is one patchwork scheme preferable over the other, if it is a patchwork?
To me, I think the standards that have been established, the rules and regs promulgated by EPA, where you have this commitment to resolving the coal ash situation.
But the bill doesn't alter the regulation. It codifies the regulation.
But you're allowing for a state-by-state determination.
But you could have that with the federal courts. You could have a judge in Alabama, where I'm from, rule one thing, and then a judge in Ohio come up with a different one. You could have the same sort of patchwork. So why wouldn't you rely upon the people who are already doing this under RCRA? Why wouldn't you allow them to do it as opposed to going to federal judges that don't deal with this day in and out? Aren't you going to get more uniformity out of that than you would out of federal judges just doing it basically, ab initio? It's the first time they've ever dealt with these things?
I don't believe you would. I just think that it's a weakening.
Okay. I respect your opinion, but I just got to tell you, from my experience in federal court, the judges do the best they possibly can. They work very hard at it, but we throw new stuff at them all the time. They're not experts in RCRA. They're experts in a lot of things, but they're not experts in RCRA. And it seems to me you're going to get better implementation enforcement. And we're not weakening anything because we're codifying the regulation. You're going to get better enforcement out of people that are already doing it. So I think I see the wisdom of the underlying bill, and I appreciate your viewpoint. It's good for me to hear the other side of it. But I think I understand the wisdom of the underlying bill, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I just, I guess, had similar line of questions in my mind as Mr. Byrne. The President, the administration has concerns that this bill weakens current regulation, and Mr. Tonko, you seem to agree with that, and Mr. Shimkus maybe has a different view, and so I'm trying to get my head around that as well. If this is, if states are allowed to essentially come up with rules that pertain to their situation, are they not required to adhere to federal minimums? Isn't there a provision that they can do more, but they can't do less than what the federal government requires?
Well, in addressing, I think, the question of the weakening, is this weakening? If for some reason the state program is found to be negligent, and then the EPA then can take it over. The permitting program has to be approved by the EPA. They have to say, boom. Then the states have a permit to say, this is how you do it in our state. This is why the Environmental Council of the states, now who are those folks? Well, they're all the EPA of all the states. They represent, their organization is called the Environmental Council of the states. The other group is the Association of State and Territorial Solid Waste Management Officials. These are the people on the ground in each state that are dealing with the solid waste and other issues. They weighed in heavily because they want to be able to meet the federal standards in a way that they can get certified and then they can enforce. That's the whole intent of the law.
Mr. Tonko, do you have any response?
Yeah, you know, there have been situations where we've seen a weakening of outcomes as it relates to the environment in general when you go through efforts like this. And I believe that, you know, with the work that has been invested by the EPA and making certain that there are these standards that come after much study and much input and much data collection, that, you know, here's a dilemma to the environment that is finally addressed, I think, in a significant manner. And we shouldn't weaken that and instead offer the opportunities to go forward with the rules and see how that works. And if we need to further modify or adjust, be in communication with EPA.
I'm still trying to figure out how that weakens it, I guess. I'm being, you know, it's Monday or, no, it's Tuesday. So
Well, I think basically what it does is allow for a patchwork, and that patchwork weakens. It can weaken.
Can, potentially. But it seems, you know, patchwork always has a negative connotation. It seems like in this case, being able to custom fit for each individual area, even different situations within individual states, maybe patchwork in this case is a positive thing. So you know, I want clean groundwater and clean air, and, you know, people's health is a huge concern of mine too. But so I'm trying to understand where you're coming from and want to make sure that that we all get what we need out of this legislation. So, but thank you for your insight, and I thank you, Madam Chair.
Gentleman yields back. I believe that ends the questioning of our panel on H.R. 1734. Closes the hearing portion for H.R. 1734, and you gentlemen are excused. We'll now consider H.R. 1599. We'll welcome Mr. Peterson, Mr. Pompeo, and I think Ms. Pingree, you're welcome to come sit at the table. You have an amendment? You want to do the first two? Okay. Ms. Pingree, we'll bring you up in just a moment when we finish up with the chairman and the ranking member. Gentlemen, if you have written materials, we'd be happy for you to leave them, and you're welcome to summarize your remarks. And I recognize Mr. Pompeo.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Fox. We do have written remarks, and we will certainly submit them, and I will be as brief and direct as I can be with you all here today. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and present HR 1599. I'm glad to be here with Mr. Peterson as well. This is something we've been working on for a year and a half. We've spoken with every group. It's a very bipartisan bill. We've answered lots of questions from lots of groups that had concerns, and we think we've now got this in a place where we do three things that are important and that there's wide consensus that we can do a really good thing for feeding the next billion people in the world and making sure that folks here in the United States have both safe and affordable food. The bill really does three things. It ensures that every new genetically engineered plant destined to enter the food supply goes through an FDA safety review. That's different from today. We prevent the creation of what would be a completely unworkable set of patchwork rules across states and cities and county by county rules for mandatory GE labeling laws. And finally, it ensures that consumers who want to know what's in their food, if you want to know if there's genetically engineered component in your food, you can continue to have the right to do that through the voluntary labeling system that exists today. We think we reinforce that with some of the USDA provisions that are contained here, and we think this is a good turn for biotechnology in the United States and safe and affordable food for every American. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Peterson.
Madam Chair, I also have a written statement, but I'm here to provide my support. And, you know, we have in the Agriculture Committee experience in doing voluntary labels. We've done it with organic, and we have gone from an industry that has 0 sales to 38 billion, and it works. One of the things they do is they decide what organic means. They come up with rules, and you have to follow the rules and all that before you can use that. And it's basically a marketing issue. This is not a food safety issue. The food safety is going to be addressed at FDA, but we have not found any problems with any of these genetically engineered products. This is a marketing issue, and so one of the things that USDA does as well is go to the industry and go to the people involved and decide what, you know, if you talk to 5 different people and ask them what a GMO is, you get 5 different answers. You know, and one of the things we have to do here is come to a conclusion about what this means, and when you label it when non-GMO, what does that mean? And that's one of the things that USDA is going to have to do. They've done it with other things, and you know, we think this is a good workable solution. And the Ag Committee voted this out almost unanimously, but not quite.
Thank you both very much.
Right, Mr. McGovern?
Mr. McGovern will have his chance to make a comment. Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I really don't have any questions. I'm just pleased to see my 2 good friends here, and want to commend them on being very bipartisan. We see Mr. Peterson up here in that role quite a bit, and it's a good reminder to folks that there's a lot of issues we can find common ground on. I'm glad you've done it here. So just thanks for your good work. Yield back.
Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, first of all, let me just say that I have great respect for the 2 gentlemen that are here. Mr. Pompeo is on my floor in the Cannon Building, and Mr. Peterson is a ranking member, a ranking Democrat on the Ag Committee. But I totally disagree with them on this issue, and I regret very much that we're going in this direction. And I quite frankly don't get it. You know, poll after poll shows that the overwhelming majority of people in this country, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, want to know what's in their food. And they favor mandatory GMO labeling, not this kind of mysterious kind of status quo that we have right now, where, you know, where non-GMO products, you know, can label themselves as such. And I just don't understand why, it is so difficult for us to give people what they want. I don't understand why that's such a radical idea. I've heard the arguments that, oh, if we had mandatory GMO labeling, that it would end up, increasing the cost of food for people. There's no evidence of that at all. I mean, I got a letter here from the CEO of Ben & Jerry's, and I want to read one paragraph here. He says, as an ice cream company that operates in more than 30 countries, many of which require mandatory GMO labeling, we are not swayed by arguments that mandatory labeling will be expensive. The truth is we regularly make changes, sometimes big, sometimes small, to our packaging. Every year we make changes between 25% and 50% of our packaging. Over the last 7 years, we've gone through 3 full line redesigns. In other words, we have changed the packaging on every single pint in our product line as a matter of normal business. And I can tell you unequivocally that changing labels does not require us to raise the price of products. Lots of things impact the cost of that a consumer pays for a pint of Ben & Jerry's. Label changes is not one of them. And so to me, this is really about people's right to know. It's that simple. This is not an argument over the science of GMOs or whether GMOs are good for you or bad for you or whether, they can feed the world or what have you. This is simply an argument over whether people have a right to get the information that they want. And people, and the polls, again, I mean, we can argue that people don't know what GMOs are, but, you can make that argument against most stuff on a label, whether people really quite understand, what these labels are. I mean, I give people the benefit of the doubt. I think people ought to get the information that they want. And so I don't understand what everybody's afraid of and why we're moving to basically keep people in the dark about information that they want to know. So why not do it? Why not do it the other way? Why not mandatory GMO labeling rather than voluntary non-GMO labeling?
So I appreciate the comments. There's lots of good reasons. If there were a health or safety issue, the FDA, in fact, will have a requirement to continue to require mandatory labels. If we get into a food safety issue, we'll absolutely be in that regime. We have, with relatively few exceptions, I've had one identified to me. We've not before had mandatory national labeling for food preferences, something people just kind of want to know about because they have a food preference. That is, it's not connected to health or safety. It seems to me this bill does nothing. You can keep talking about denying right to know. I'm not sure exactly where that right comes from, but wholly apart from that, anybody who wants to consume food, I have a cousin who prefers to only consume non-GMO food for herself and her family. Nothing in this bill is going to deny her the ability to continue to live out her life streams and consume non-GMO food forever.
No, but
she can go to businesses that are prepared to sell it, and if the market demands it, I promise you, every food label in America will contain that element.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One is that, the reason why I think people want to have it specific is because, I've also seen polling that where 60% of Americans currently believe that natural means GMO-free. There's lots of confusing things on labels that are there that quite frankly make it difficult for people to kind of figure out what the truth is about what they eat. And again, I'm not arguing, this is not to me about safety, but we say, where do people have the right to know? I mean, I just think people have that right. And that if a majority of Americans want to know what's in their food, we ought not to stand in the way and try to frustrate those efforts. We ought to give them what they want. Because this seems like such a Washington solution to what clearly is a very popular movement all across the country to know more about what's in their food. And I guess we could say we all know best because we're in Washington, and you don't have a right to know this, and you can go on a web page, or you can look at this brochure, or call this number or whatever to figure out what's in your food. But again, I mean, I'm just kind of puzzled that there is such an effort to try to, and the only reason why, by the way, states are moving in this direction I don't want 50 different labels either. And the only reason why states are doing this is because, one is we're not doing anything here, But two, I think they're afraid of, that when we do something, it will be this. It will basically be cut off their ability to allow people to know whether their product contains GMOs or not.
Well, I have a question. Again, what is a GMO? This is something that was a term that was put together in Europe to basically oppose any technology in agriculture, is what it boils down to.
Well,
And so does this, are you saying that we should, we've been plant breeding for 100 and some years. And that's genetically modifying, you took maize and we made it into hybrid corn through plant breeding. Is that,
I'm not arguing whether or not, there's benefits to GMO crops or not. And I can't believe that the USDA or the FDA can't come up with a definition, just like you're asking them to come up with a definition for what non-GMO is. I mean, I don't think that that's terribly difficult to do, but I'm just simply saying that overwhelmingly, I think people...
Well, we had country of origin labeling mandatory, and we just lost in court, and now there's a bill to repeal it,
Well,
So, I mean, we tried it, and that didn't.
on the country of origin label, you're saying?
Pardon?
Are you talking about the country of origin?
Yeah. country
Yeah.
of origin
Yeah, well,
labeling.
I don't think the American people are on the side of repealing that. That's a,
Well,
that's a,
mean, that's what we're in
and I
the
don't think this runs
process
into but by the way, other countries have done it. I mean, we're not the only, there's, there are dozens and dozens of countries around the world that already have this.
Yeah.
64 of them. So it's not like, I think we'd be running into any difficulty with trade agreements. Look, I'll just say this. I hope that when this comes to the floor, that we have an open rule, that people can have an opportunity to weigh in on this. I mean, the whole process of this coming to the Rules Committee is a little bit strange to me. I mean, this legislation started out as a bill under the jurisdiction of Energy and Commerce, with more authority given to the FDA than the Agriculture Committee, then took the bill and rewrote it, gave more authority to the USDA under its jurisdiction. And now we've been given a manager's amendment that makes further changes. And while the Ag Committee did mark up this bill, the Energy and Commerce Committee did not. I think even the kind of history of it getting to this point is a little bit strange. So I would hope that given that, we can have an open debate and people can, no matter what your position on this is, but I'm just kind of puzzled at the resistance of giving people what they want, and yet that's what we're doing here, and I regret we're going down this road. But anyway, thank you both, and I yield back my time.
Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I find myself a little confused because I agreed with so much that Mr. McGovern had to say. I think we ought to give people what they want, and so I want to understand what the food product choices are that this bill is going to take away from me today. I shop. I go to the grocery store. I may spend 3 hours in there. If I can save $2 on a can of beans, I'm gonna save. 2 cents on a can of beans. I'm gonna save 2 cents. And so I'm looking at all those labels. I'm thinking about now every I don't ever buy name brand cereal. I'm buying the discount cereal. It all says no high fructose corn syrup. I don't know why it says no high fructose corn syrup. I like high fructose corn syrup, but apparently folks wanted to find out if there was high fructose corn syrup. And so now it's in these big labels all over everything. I'm eating whatever they're selling, but I value the information that they're sharing. So what choices are you going to take away from me? Because I don't want my choices to be taken away.
There will be no choices taken away.
Well, but we're talking about giving the people what they want, and what I want to know is what's in the food that I'm eating. If I'm Ben and Jerry's, and I'm before I got bought out by a giant corporate concern, if I'm a mom and pop shop trying to give the people what they want, my mom and dad are grass-fed beef farmers down in Georgia. You can come out, you can name your cow, you can watch it eat, you can decide which pasture. You want more rye, you want more fescue. What do you want your cow eating? We can take you through that and work on. You want blue eggs? You want green eggs? You want red eggs? You want white eggs? What kind of egg do you want? We have a chicken.
Will the gentleman yield?
Be happy to yield,
Yeah,
my friend.
I think what people...
We do not ship to Massachusetts. I will say to the gentleman before he asked. We're sold out for this year.
I think the point was whether people want to know whether the products that they purchase contain genetically engineered ingredients or GMOs. And that's what this is. I think that is what people want to know. Under this legislation, there is no requirement that any product be labeled GMO. There's a voluntary standard that will be that will be formalized that would prevent mandatory GMO labeling, but allow non-GMO products, if they so chose, to try to comply with this voluntary standard. So that's what this is about. So the polls that I'm referring to say that people would like to know whether they contain GMOs. They won't have that right necessarily to know whether it does.
Well,
And people who, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of confusion. Sometimes people, when they buy products that say natural, they think that means non-GMOs. There's a lot of confusion as to what some of these labels, and so that's what this issue is about. So, you know, that's just to clarify.
I think, my friend, because that's actually the question I was getting to. If I'm starting my mom and pop operation, and I know that there's a demand for locally grown produce, I know there's a demand for heritage crops. If I want to go out there and build my name based on the fact that I'm the only guy growing cotton in the state of Georgia that's not genetically modified. I've got that one field and the big fence is up to keep folks from having seeds fly over. And I want to label my cottonseed oil non-GMO because it's a heritage crop that has been growing in Georgia for the past 350 years. This bill is going to prevent me from having that label?
No, it's the opposite. It's going to allow you to do that. You know about the company named Sunopta?
Sure.
Yeah, they are non-GMO. The main supplier of non-GMO in the United States. They've gone from 0 to $2 billion in a few years. You know, what this does is it allows you to label your product non-GMO. And there's a process within the USDA to determine what that means. Or genetically engineered is what the proper terminology. So, it doesn't stop.
So if what the people want is to buy non-GMO food.
If they want food that's not genetically engineered, they'll be able to buy it because it'll be labeled as such. And if they don't care, they can just, 80% of the food is genetically engineered anyway.
But when I'm trying to produce this thing in Georgia, and of course we've got lots of our own standards. I want to ship my product to Tennessee. I want to ship it to California. I want to ship it to Massachusetts. I might want to get some beef up there to Mr. McGovern. If I'm shipping these products across state lines, then we're gonna have one standard for what non-GMO means. So that every customer across the country is on the same page of what non-GMO means.
This legislation will do that. It will set a USDA standard for for how the definition will appear, and then there's a mechanism for private entities to develop their own labeling in a way that they want to, but it needs to at least meet the USDA standard. If it does that, now, if there's enough consumers like you prepared to pay too much for food, they're welcome to do that.
And so the USDA is going to set up the standard, but if I'm worried about food safety, you're saying the FDA is also going to approve all the new GMO products that are coming out?
Every new genetically engineered food product that will enter the food stream will be required to be submitted to the FDA for its review.
So in terms of a standard, you're going to have a national known standard that everybody can depend on for what's going to be in their food? In terms of giving consumers choices, you're going to allow those products to be shipped to every corner of these United States, and you're going to require that the FDA sign off on the safety and efficacy of every one of those products before they come to market?
Yes, I think you're no longer confused.
I'm no longer confused. I support this legislation. I appreciate you all bringing this forward.
I think the gentleman is confused. If you just yield to me for 1 second.
Be happy to yield to my friend.
Yeah, so this is a voluntary standard, number one, all right? And number two, what people want to know basically is whether or not their product does contain GMOs. So the question is, why not give people what they want, which is a mandatory label, so that there's no confusion, so that you don't have to wonder with whether or not somebody decided to voluntarily comply, or whether or not you're confused by the word natural or something else. Why not just give people what they want? I guess in Washington knows best. I guess that's what the gentleman's saying.
I have a little experience with the answer to that question. Again, being in the grass-fed beef business, we think grass-fed beef is better. We think if you feed the cow what God wanted the cow to eat to begin with, that the cow's going to be healthier and happier on the tail end. But there are those who have really fat, well-marbled cows that have been eating corn their whole life. And they believe if we set a standard that says something about grass-fed beef being good, then that automatically means corn-fed beef is bad. And of course, that's what I hear in the GMO. I see it in the corn syrup world, that by definition, if you think that one thing is good, then the other thing must be bad. If there's a label up there that says,
nobody's saying that, but
we do that, as if there's something wrong with you if you don't. Well, what's important to me is that we actually have these choices, that folks are going to be able to see these one at the time.
We have labeling requirements of food, if it's homogenized, frozen, or made from concentrate. I mean, that doesn't mean it's bad or good. I mean, no one here is saying that by putting this label on, we're saying that it's bad. That's not what this is about. The question is that people would like to know what they buy. And again, 64 countries do it. In some countries, that have done it, it hasn't changed purchasing patterns, but I think people want to know. And I don't understand why that is such a radical idea. And you can kind of talk all around it all you want, but again, at the end of the day, what you're saying is that, notwithstanding the fact that something like 90% of the people in this country, when polled, say they would like to have mandatory GMO labeling, you're saying, no, we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to prevent that, and we're going to have some sort of a voluntary patchwork in place for non-GMO foods. And I just fundamentally have a problem with that. And I thank the gentleman for yielding. I yield back.
Happy to yield. I would say to my friend that this is not Washington knows best. Washington knows best is when you move from having a no trans fats label to prohibiting trans fats being included in anything whatsoever. That's Washington knows best. Having a label that allows consumers to choose. I don't know how consumers are in other parts of the country, but in Georgia, they're pretty picky. And we will drive this marketplace.
Gentleman yield.
Happy to yield, my friend.
I want to remind us that we have a stenographer in here who's expected to get down the transcript. And as close as possible, it does help her and this chairman to try and make sure that our transcript is as clean as possible. And that is why we refer to each other and ask for us to yield back. And I'd like to remind each of us that it allows her a chance to do her job, which I expect her to do. Thank you very much.
I thank my chairman, and I will yield back.
Yes, sir. Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Florida, Judge Hastings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and my good friend, and he is my good friend from Georgia. I recommend that he just do his congressional business and stay out of the food business, because you're too confused to really get into any other kind of business. I just have an observation. I don't have a question. I appreciate both the gentlemen being here, but I'm mindful of really how on one hand we say we want states' rights, and on another hand we say we want federal rights, or we want Washington to do it versus the state. We just got through testimony on coal ash, where we want the states to be involved. Now, if I'm mistaken, I need to be corrected by the two gentlemen, but I believe 3 states at least, and maybe several others, but Connecticut, Maine, and Vermont have already passed mandatory labeling. And it doesn't make sense to me that this legislation is going to undo what those states prefer. So let's make up our mind about what we want when we talk about states' rights. So I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. By the way, nice try. Nice tie, Judge. I like that new tie. Oh, Judge, I prefer the tie. Thank you very much. It's kind of hard with your robe on sometimes to see that thing, but does any other Republican see? The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Stivers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to Mr. Pompeo, so I think the gentleman from Georgia finally made it pretty crystal clear. Under this standard, anybody who wants to know about GMO food and can buy food that someone chooses to label and pay whatever they want to pay for that because they'll get the information they want.
That's correct. That's exactly right.
So, and the gentleman from Massachusetts continues to say that people want this. So there have been mandatory ballot initiatives in a few states, and one state passed it. Two legislatures have passed it. I think Maine and Connecticut were passed by the legislature, and Vermont passed by the ballot initiative. Is that right?
Every time this issue has been on the ballot, it has been rejected by the people of the state that have been.
Was
represented.
rejected by Oregon, Colorado, California, and Washington. Those aren't exactly conservative bastions like Georgia, but they, I'm sorry, the Republican delegation from the state of Washington corrected me there.
Get it right first.
But I mean, these aren't, these things have gone down more often than they've been passed, right?
Mr. Stivers, it belies that Mr. McGovern refers to a single poll that shows us 90% data. It belies that when the constituents really get a chance to think about it and aren't just getting some fly-by-night poll. Surely if someone calls you and says, do you want to know about something? Goodness gracious, I could get 90% to that on
You want to know what's in your food? Yeah.
many things. When they've actually had a chance to consider and be thoughtful and had both sides presented in an accurate and fair way, they have rejected it precisely 100% of the time.
100% of the time. So Vermont didn't even pass, that was
Was
the
the
legislature that
state
passed that too?
legislature.
Okay, so actually, every time it's been before the voters, they've rejected it. So sounds like your standard gets us where we need to go. I want to thank both of you for your bipartisan work on it, and appreciate you answering my questions. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
So, I come from one of the states where it was recently proposed to require labeling, and one of the main arguments used against the state requiring labeling is, well, it makes more sense for the federal government to do it so that there's one set of labels across all 50 states. So instead of reacting to, and that would make sense if and there's a bill to do that I co-sponsor Mr. DeFazio's bill. So if it failed in my state of Colorado, and a lot of the campaign and discussion was about, well, let's just do it federally, and we're doing the opposite of it federally. We're actually stripping away the ability of states to do it. That's only going to add fuel to that fire. Next time it's on the ballot in Colorado, it'll probably pass, as it has in several other states. And there's a lot of labeling. It's not a tremendous problem to solve. There's a lot of labeling requirements now that are state to state. I was just looking up deposit labeling requirements where, if you get a soda, it'll say, 5 cents in California and 3 cents in these 6 states, and they print that right on there. And it's never been I don't think it's raised the cost of, we call it pop in Colorado. I think in Georgia they call it Coke, don't they, regardless of what it is? I speak Georgian. We call it pop. So, it's never been a problem. I've never seen any studies that say pop costs more in states that have labeling requirements. And usually the companies just do one run of labels, and it just has all the requirements right on there. So, I don't see a huge problem with this if the states do it, but the solution is obvious. If some ag producers don't want to have 2 or 3 different labels, or they don't think they can put it on one label, let's just have it nationally. So we say it's, contains a GMO or a non-GMO. So I don't understand why we're not solving it that way. It seems like that's the obvious way to solve this, and I'll go to either one of you to just say, why aren't we doing it the obvious way?
Well, I wouldn't call it the obvious way. With all due respect, I'd just disagree with that. The obvious way is to let the market sort out
Well,
what
hold on, we're
consumers really want.
claiming my time. You're actually denying the market the right to allow it by saying that states can't even decide their own labeling requirements. So even if a state wants to say, we want to have this label or that label for GMOs, you're saying that they can't under this. You're preempting state law as well as tribal law.
The predicate of your question was that we were going to have national labeling. I thought you had agreed that state by state, or even city by city, we've seen cities attempt to put labeling things in front of agriculture and food suppliers as well. So I thought the predicate of your question was that we were just talking about whether there would be national or state labeling.
Well, if it becomes a problem where this is somehow adding to the cost of food, I guess that would be the problem if there were different labels. And it hasn't in bottle deposits. I mean, is there, as far as you know, been a problem with bottle deposit labeling requirements, increasing the cost of sodas or pop?
I don't know one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly haven't heard from any of the consumer groups or soft drink companies that that's represented a problem. I don't know if they like it or not. They may not, but I mean, I've never heard of it causing a problem. So if, I think we're clearly, Mr. Peterson?
It does cause problems, because when Europe did this, they, you know, banned it out of the food supply until they found out that they couldn't feed their livestock because they couldn't get enough soybeans and corn. So they exempted, which is 91% of the market, they exempted stuff that's fed to livestock from the GMO law because they couldn't make it work, you know. And in my area, SunOpta, this company, which is primarily started in Minnesota, they pay 2.5 times for soybeans if they're non-GMO. And if they're organic, they pay 4 times.
Right.
You know,
and that's reclaiming my time. That's
well, I
actually,
mean, so the point is,
you know, you actually hit on the whole reason why labeling is so important nationally. Okay, right now consumers can get non-GMO product, but they have to buy organic. There is no conventional non-GMO category that they can find. What you just
no, that's
told me
not true.
is that the pricing is in between. You're saying conventional non-GMO is 2.5 cents, organic 4, conventional is the lowest price. I don't know if you got to that one. It's whatever it is, 1.5 cents or whatever, the lowest. So why not have that uniform labeling so people can choose, and we create that whole new market category?
Gentlemen, yield.
I yield to the gentleman. Yeah, to the gentleman.
Gentleman, yield.
Oh, to the chair. Absolutely, I always yield to the chair.
I'm trying to follow your argument.
Yeah.
And first of all, Coca-Cola is a little bit different than a lot of other things. They can manufacture it right there.
Yeah, well,
One product.
It's not just one company. Any company sells those bottles.
I'm just simply saying, I'm trying to follow you.
Of course.
If you have one label for beef, somebody may eat corn, somebody may eat hay, somebody may eat all these other things. At some point, your one label turns into 50 labels. Because somebody may eat corn that's genetically modified, somebody may have, I mean, there may be 10 different sources. I used to represent a rural district. I should remember what I'm talking about, but I'm just saying there's all sorts of different components and byproducts.
the bottom line is that GMOs,
I don't know that you can have one, is my point. Thank you very much.
Well, again, this is a simple binary, either, and as the gentleman from Massachusetts said, any national labeling method would have the clear methodology of what's in and what's out. It would be either contains GMO, does not contain GMO. So it wouldn't get into these 6 things have GMOs, these 5 don't. It would say this product as a whole contains or doesn't contain GMOs. It would be as simple as the 5% bottling deposit component to a label on a bottle, which as far as I know doesn't raise the cost. As the gentleman from Massachusetts said, it is something that 9 in 10 people would like to know, would like to see. Again, it just seems like an obvious thing to me. Again, one of the purposes is it creates a new marketing category. That's why many of the companies in my district are so strongly supportive of national GMO labeling, as well as the state initiative, which failed, again, in large part because people wanted national labeling. What they believe is there's another category, right? You have organic, but that means you're not getting the production efficiency gains of conventional agriculture, so that's going to cost quite a lot more. You have conventional with GMO. This is in the categories that, of course, have GMOs that are on the market, and that's going to be your lowest cost. So there is demand where you have conventional techniques, insecticide, fertilizer, et cetera, but non-GMOs. And some people are willing to pay more for those than conventional GMOs. So why not create this additional marketing category, which would be a boom for American agriculture? I mean, I'll go to the...
But it's been created. It's absolutely been created. You can go to the store. I was in Boulder, Colorado. I saw scores of products that said non-GMO. It works. American consumers have the capacity, if they want to eat only non-GMO foods, to do so across a broad range of food categories today. And after this bill,
again,
just to answer your question, after this bill, they will still be able
No, well, this bill contributes to misinformation because 60% of people think that all natural means no GMO. And under this specifically, it would preempt any state labeling requirements rather than go to a national labeling requirement. So I guess, my problem is twofold. First of all, prove to me there's a problem with state and local labeling. There isn't today with 3 states. If in fact labels seem to be getting so big that it calls on a national solution, if it's more than a couple lines like bottling, I don't know how many bottling regimes there are. I was trying to look it up as you were talking, but there's many states that have different bottling. And that's why you see on a can or bottle, 5 cents in these 6 states, 8 cents. So it meets all their requirements, and it takes up a couple lines because it is different in different states. Let's say every state had a different amount of money for bottling, right? One state was 1 cent, another state was 2 cents, 3 cents. It might get so big because it would have 50 states that you'd say, we come here to Washington, they tell their representatives, why don't you guys come up with a more efficient way of doing it? Where you post it and you say, check for your state because it's getting too big on the label. Right now, GMO labeling is required by the couple states I think the 3 states that do it. It's not becoming so big on the labels that it even is a problem for Congress to solve, as far as I'm concerned. If it gets to that point in 5 or 10 years, where so many states or counties are trying to do it, where it gets really, really big on that label and there's no room for other stuff like marketing, or it starts crowding out other stuff, then come to Washington, and then we can have a simple, uniform national labeling requirement that would take the place of what all those states are doing. But this is a problem, a solution in search of a problem, because we simply don't have a lot of labeling requirements today from the states. And I'm just wondering what problem it is you're trying to solve when, in fact, this is not a big part of any label of any product in our country.
Mr. Chairman, can I?
Gentlemen, can
Yeah, I yield for an answer.
This is a marketing issue, and that's the problem. When people see on the label says no GMO, they don't know, they think this is something wrong with it. This is not about food safety at all. This is about marketing. And we've proved that with organic, where we've, developed that, and, we put that in the Farm Bill, and we've really grown a tremendous industry there. Now the non-GMO people see a market. They want to exploit that market. But 95% of the products today have GMOs in them. So why are we going to label 95%, just because of the 5%? Maybe someday they'll be at 40%. Maybe we will have a different discussion at that point. But this is a marketing issue. And if you take those 60% or 90% of the people that want to know, they want to know about food safety. They don't want to know about what the best way to market the food to them is. And that's what this is about. This is marketing. It's not food safety. And the average consumer doesn't know that. That's the problem. And so what we're trying to do is bring some order to this whole process.
Is your opinion that organic is also marketing and not related to food
Absolutely.
safety? So you mean I'm paying more for organic food for my kids for no reason, no health reason?
It's up to you. It's up to you to decide. We have standards on what organic is. It's up to you. Is that worth it to you to do that? Fine. And there's some organic that's not any more expensive than conventional. You can't sort all that out.
We just saved you some money, Mr. Polis.
What's that?
We just saved you some money.
Well, I would rather not gamble with the health of my kids with insecticides and hormones and other dangerous byproducts of conventional agriculture. There's a reason that the opponents of this bill have called it the Deny the Americans' Right to Know Act, because it would effectively prevent states from even having that discussion about what they want to label within their own borders. So I truly hope that we can encourage the states as laboratories of democracy to look at meeting the labeling desires of their citizens. And just as my state currently decided not to require GMO labeling, they might want it in future elections, particularly if we don't move forward with national mandatory labeling. And I fear that this bill is yet another step in that wrong direction. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlemen, yields back his time. Is there the gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Yes, sir. I'm trying to boil this down where I can understand it. I'm the consumer. I want to go shopping. Now, I'll be first to admit, my wife frequently tells me exactly what to get, and I prefer that. That way I don't come back home with the wrong thing, but occasionally I have to read the labels. So I'm trying to process it as the guy in the grocery store that wants to come home and make sure his wife's not mad at him. So it seems to me, from my point of view as a consumer, that uniformity is better than non-uniformity, because if you give me too much information, I get confused, and that makes it more likely I'm going to bring the wrong thing home. So this does seem to be a case where we do want uniformity among the states because it helps consumers in understanding what all that information is. And so I think I like the uniformity part of it. It seems to me the more relevant part of this discussion is whether it's going to be mandatory or not. And if I'm a consumer, my wife says, I want you to only bring home stuff that's non-GMO, then I'm going to go to the store and look for the stuff that's non-GMO. If there's some producer out there that's not telling me it's non-GMO, I'm not buying his product because I've been told, don't buy the GMO stuff. So if you want to market to me, then you better make the choice to tell me on the label where you are on GMOs, because if you don't tell me, I'm going to think you are. So we've really left it in the hands of the consumers this way, because the consumers can go in there and say, for that 5%, and I don't know if my household's in that 5% yet or not, I'll probably find out when I get home. If for that 5%, we're going to be looking for the label. And if you voluntarily, as a producer, choose to use it, then that's a marketing device to me in the 5%. And then perhaps those producers need to be growing the 5% by saying, you really do need to have this non-GMO product. So it seems to me we've accomplished both objectives. We're not only providing the uniformity for the consumer, we're providing the essential information that they need, because if the producer decides not to put non-GMO language in there, they're telling the consumer, this is GMO stuff here. So I think, and I don't really have a question, it just seems to me you have in this bill covered both concerns and solved the problem for a consumer like me that just wants to bring home the right thing to his wife after he's gone to the store. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, yield back to time. Is there further? Our ag guy is really from the state of Washington, is doing a great job on this committee for us, and the gentleman from the state of Washington is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We went through this in the state of Washington. We had an election a couple of years ago, I-522, on whether the people wanted mandatory labeling on their food products, and the voters rejected it. Given the information that was provided to them on both sides, they made, I think, an educated decision. Did that tell us that they did not want to know what was in their food? I don't think so. I think they do, but not in the way that our initiative was presented, and I don't think in other ways that I've seen in other states was the same thing, that the issue was decided that they didn't want it presented in that way. I think what we see here, as Mr. Byrne was just trying to explain, or excuse me, explaining, that you've accomplished giving people the information they want. Companies can provide that information on labels. Consumers can make their purchasing choices by what's on a label, or just as importantly, by what's not on a label, it seems to me. But to take it even further, and this is where I want to be sure, as I'm making my decision on how to vote on this, is the standards that are going to be put into place, or requirements from the USDA on what exactly does a label mean when it says non-GMO. Are there not certain restrictions or standards that are being provided behind what that label says? Does this not make a consumer, shouldn't it make a consumer have more confidence because of what's behind the words on the label?
I appreciate the question. No, that'll definitely be true. The USDA will be tasked with developing a standard. That standard will be known, and therefore consumers can know whether they choose the USDA form of the label or a private entity that could also be accredited to develop a label. They'll know what is contained in that standard, so they'll know precisely what it means when they pick up something that says non-GMO.
And what about, and you should never, excuse me, Mr. Peterson, did you want to say something about that? Well, you know, there's going to be a big debate if this bill gets into law down at the department within the industry, and everybody else is involved to decide what this means and what is genetically engineered. At this point, you know, like I say, you talk to 5 people, you get 5 answers about what that means. So they'll have to decide that. Does it mean plant breeding? You know, does it mean, does it only mean when you take a gene out of another species and put it into a different species? Is that what it means? Those are the decisions that have to be made. But the folks that get involved in this, you know, I mean, if 90% of the people want GMOs, non-GMOs, I'll tell you, these companies would be falling over each other to go after that market. You know, I mean, it'd be, you know, everybody would be marketing non-GMOs if that's what people wanted, you know, because the marketplace at the end of the day is going to decide this, you know. So, you know, they're going to go through this process, and, you know, the folks that are behind this have other agendas, you know, in terms of the size of the farm and how you farm, and, you know, they don't like glyphosate, you know, and they better be careful because now everybody's going back to 2,4-D, you know. And I've got people in my district now that are going from Roundup Ready beans and corn that are going all conventional, you know, because it's cheaper. They don't have to pay the tech fee, and they got chemicals now that work actually better than Roundup. And so now the people are against that. You know, so I mean, it keeps shifting because there's folks behind this labeling that it has nothing to do with the label. It has to do with they don't like the way we farm. And they've got some agenda that they're trying to push.
Well, it seems to me that information is important. Consumers want that information, as Mr. McGovern says, and it seems like this is a good way to provide that. What about the term natural? Does this bill address that as well?
It does. It requests that requires that there be a definition developed around the word natural as well.
So further standards that people can
Correct.
know what that term means when they see it on a label. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, both of you, for being here, and look forward to the debate. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Mr. Pompeo, I want to thank you for taking time to be here. I think that the specificity that you provided this committee allows at least me a chance to know more about the great work, the in-depth evaluation that's necessary, and how some observations related to the industry, this bill would help. It would help people to be aware, consumers to be aware, and standards that would be established, which is really what I think is a good thing. Mr. Peterson, you're a longtime member of this body. How long have you been involved on the Agriculture Committee?
25
Mr.
years.
Peterson, I don't want this hearing to go too much further without what I believe is important, and that is I think we ought to thank farmers and ranchers in this country for the great work that they do. They are men and women who dedicate their lives and devotion not only to their stock, but their vegetables, the land, the topsoil, their way of life, the kind of families that they raise. Do you believe in any way that there would be any conspiracy out there or a group of people who would not want to provide the very best of services, products available to the American consumer, families who would count on them, their way of doing business?
Absolutely not. You know, these genetically engineered products have already been proven to be safe. You know, that's not what the issue is. This is a marketing issue.
Well, also, is...
So the farmers, you know, as I said earlier, they will grumble about having to pay the tech fee to Monsanto.
Well, I think also, I've been led to believe it's important, you know, that technology be applied to agriculture also. And as you said, there are changes from things that we grew up with that might be more available now, a greater utilization of yield, of sustaining crops, of making sure they're protected. All these things, I believe, are a part of a technology-driven society that happen in agriculture.
Absolutely.
I just want you to know that I look at both of you, I look at the gentleman, Mr. Conaway, who's chairman of the committee, and I try and look at what you're really trying to do, and that is to allow men and women who've given their hard-earned money and their life and their children and the way of life, and to make sure we sustain them. And I think in return, they're giving back what I consider to be to feed the world. They're after people who will provide a great product. Many times we're putting a demand on these people by the way they live their life, Mother Nature, and a lot of other things. And I just don't want this hearing to go away that we don't reinforce how important our rural communities are, the way of life, agriculture products, schools all across this country. And I admire those people. And I want you to know that I do look at you as the kind of person who I would trust to give us not only wise advice, and you're here in support of Mr. Pompeo's bill today, is that correct?
Well, and, you know, our big challenge in agriculture is going to be how are we going to feed the world? That, you know, they're talking about the population is going to explode, you know, over the next few years, and that's going to be a challenge, and it's going to take technology. You know, that's how we got to the point we're at.
Yes.
And it's going to take technology to feed the world, and if we screw it up, it's going to be a big problem.
And there are lots of problems on the horizon, not just bees and others. And yet I equally support and defend what we've heard from members around this table who their wife sends them.
Yeah, people should know.
And people who do care about their children and what's in their children. I care about every bit of that too, but I think that what I'm saying is the American farmer and rancher is equally there and does a great job. I want to thank both of you for being here today, and thank you very much. Mr. Pompeo, congratulations on a very successful bill and a great person to come up and serve with you on this important issue. Thank you very much. If both of you will make sure anything you left in writing, that you had anything in writing, leave it for our great stenographer. I'd appreciate it. There you go. Mrs. Pingree, welcome. I know you've had a chance to have a seat there on the front row. I hope we didn't get too much, the debate didn't come out of hand at you, but I know you enjoy this. You're still smiling. Without objection, anything gentlewoman has in writing will be entered to the record. If she'll leave that, and gentleman, make sure she's got her green light on. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the members of this committee for what's already been a very lively debate, and I know you're all going to be anxious to go and vote soon. So I just want to make a few comments on 3 of the amendments on which I'm a co-sponsor, number 3, number 7, and number 5. And let me just kind of generalize here. I can tell from your previous conversation, and it's an honor to visit the Rules Committee. I got to serve on here in my first term, and can't say I really miss the hard work that you all do, but I appreciate the chance to be back in the room with you. And I will have to say I have deep concerns about this bill, and my amendments would offer some other options based on some of the things that you've all been talking about today. I don't think that there will be, you know, the debate will be sorted out here in this committee, although you've really dug in a little bit, but hopefully we'll have a chance to have some lively debate on the floor, and I hope you will accept some amendments because I think it will give us that much more opportunity to sort out some of the questions that you've already asked and some of the things that our constituents have been asking us. I want to reinforce some of the things that we've already heard. 9 out of 10 consumers think GMO labeling is a good thing. We should have it. And this bill virtually guarantees there will be no requirement for GMO labeling anywhere in the country. Now, I happen to come from one of those states that has passed a GMO labeling bill. So you can imagine the states' rights part of this concerned me quite a bit. And I just want to be very clear, it was a bipartisan bill, so while this debate is also bipartisan, in my state, it was sponsored by a Republican. Republicans and Democrats voted for it, and our Republican governor signed the bill. So we want that right in my state, which has benefited greatly. We have a very rural economy. I happen to represent the most rural state in the country, which may come as a surprise to some of you, but it is, Maine is, and Maine has benefited tremendously from the growth and interest in non-GMO and organic food. So from our farmers' perspective and our consumers' perspective, this is a right-to-know issue, and this is an opportunity for our farmers to make it clear what is on the shelf and what's in it. So we see it as a states' rights issue, as a right to know for the consumers. When 9 out of 10 of your constituents say they want to know something, I don't know why we then I will say they should have the right to know that. I don't actually know why we decided to label orange juice made from concentrate. I'm a shopper. I buy for my kids. I buy for my family. I'm not, maybe the Floridians know, but I'm not sure why we decided that was an essential question to be answered, and I don't think it was about a health benefit. I think it was because a group of farmers wanted to make sure you knew the distinction between fresh and concentrated orange juice, and that was reconcentrated in your jar. Same with farm-raised fish. I represent a lot of fishermen, and we have to label if something is farm-raised or if it's wild-caught. That matters to my fishermen. They want to make sure that you know the difference between when they went out and put a long day harvesting that salmon or when it was raised in a farm and perhaps the conditions were different, because you do have to use more antibiotics in salmon fishing when it's in pens, and there are different conditions. So we've decided that some things are reasonable for the consumer to have the right to know. So I think it's very reasonable to say we should have a mandatory standard. I think we'll have a serious debate on this bill, but my 3 amendments cover some of those things. One of them protects state labeling laws. It gets rid of the state preemption in this because I can guarantee you that my constituents will be very upset if Congress decides to overturn what we've done in our home state. And believe me, it was a long-fought battle. It was well discussed. It had huge public hearings, and people had a lot to say about it, particularly the farmers in our state. One of my other amendments creates a farmers' competitive grants program at the USDA that would compensate some of those farmers who are affected by drift. There are conventional farmers, Mr. Peterson was very articulate in describing it, and there are organic and non-GMO farmers. And some states have already passed laws about barriers and boundaries. This would preempt those, and this would undo those. So I say, well, if we decide to do that as a Congress, we should compensate some of those farmers who are currently benefiting, some of them from the $39 billion market out there in organic food and want to be in the non-GMO market as well, and they should have the right to be compensated if their crops are contaminated. And the other one just strikes the entire bill except the section on USDA certification. I do think it's important the USDA set a standard here. People have the right to know what this actually means. Mr. Peterson was right. There's a lot of confusion about what that is. Many people think natural means this. Many people think that non-GMO is a higher standard than organic, which it isn't. And an organically labeled food can't have a GMO ingredient. So I think all these amendments, of course, are brilliant, should be accepted by this committee, and I appreciate your long, thoughtful debate on this. And I do want to say to Mr. Woodall, I do also raise grass-fed beef, and if you ever want to have a beef, taste-off, I'm pretty sure it's a little better when it comes from the state of Maine, just that much happier cows. So I thank you for the time, and I yield
Thank you
back.
very much. Mrs. Fox.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate our colleague coming today and making her presentation, and I know about her background and her passion about this issue. I have no questions and yield back.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Slaughter.
I really want to thank this witness because I've not eaten chicken for several years now because of the overuse of antibiotics and soaking it in Clorox before it goes to market. And I commented I don't think I'd eat a chicken unless I could raise it in the backyard. Shelley does that already, and he's promised me a chicken.
I'd owe you
like
one.
to see these amendments made in order. They're terribly important. What we're about to do, here's an awful step backward. And I appreciate you bringing up the fact that organic foods enjoy such a great market. People are perfectly willing to pay for better food to feed their families. It's not antibiotic and hormone soaked or any other chemicals. And so thank you for all the work you do on that. And I certainly hope all your amendments will be made in order because they're excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other Democrat that seeks time?
I would just say, I want to support the gentlelady's amendments. I want to thank her for her leadership on this issue. And again, I mean, this is a question about whether or not people have the right to know what's in their food and how it's grown. I don't know why that's such a radical idea. The current kind of voluntary system is a patchwork. It's confusing. Words like natural are confusing. I don't know where this is going to go on the floor, and I don't know what's going to go in the Senate. But I can tell you this, that this issue isn't going to go away. So if people think that somehow you're doing an end run around, the people of Maine or Vermont or even Massachusetts where they're talking about this issue, I think you're wrong because people aren't going to just move on to something else. People do want to know what's in their food. They ought to have a right to know it. So I thank the gentlelady.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from Colorado.
Has the labeling requirements, has that started in Maine already? Is that already in effect?
No, Maine was one of those states that, as was mentioned earlier, was concerned that we didn't have a federal standard, and so there's a provision in the law that a certain number of states have to pass the bill. Vermont is different, and Vermont is under a court challenge right now, but I think they're allowed to go ahead with implementing the labeling.
Okay. Well, and one of the, it's a strange concern to be raised from the people who support this bill, but they seem to think that if we label GMOs, people aren't going to want to buy them. I would ask, first, I eat GMOs. I want to ask you if you eat GMOs yourself.
I think we all do, unless we have a very sparse diet or eat only organic food.
So to be clear, I mean, those of us who support labeling, I don't plan to stop buying GMOs once we have labeling. I don't think most consumers do. It's about information that people want to have and choice. So it's absolutely ridiculous to think that somehow people aren't going to be buying the 95% of products that are I think somebody said 95% of them have GMOs. Of course, they're going to continue to buy those just as I buy them today. So that's just a false argument that they're making. I'll be happy to go to the gentlelady from Maine if she has another response or something to say on that.
I just want to clarify, Vermont did actually, I forgot, got through its SCORT challenge, and labeling will begin in 2016. So we will have a state, and I know many of you came from state legislatures, I did, and one of the reasons we don't preempt states for doing all kinds of things that represent all kinds of ideologies is because we consider states laboratories of democracy. Things happen in our states that work or don't work. We get to try them out there, and then they often come to a congressional level or a federal level. And the idea that here in Congress we would say, sorry, you can't make these decisions in your home state, I don't know about your home states, but I just know they'll be very grumpy in mine.
Yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Is there any Republican that seeks time? The gentleman from Oklahoma.
Just one question to my friend from the Appropriations Committee. When we have the great Pingree Woodall beef shootout, or whatever you want to, cookout, I want an invitation. Yield back.
It would be an honor, and be prepared, you might have to cross party lines on your vote.
Wouldn't be the first time.
I'd like to get invited too. Is there any Republican that seeks time? Thank you very much for taking time to be here, and I know you spent a good bit of your afternoon here, but it was an honor, I'm sure, of Hugh Halperin's birthday, and we need a piece of cake for Hugh a little bit later, but we'll see if we can get out of here. Mr. Henry, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Is there any other member that seeks time before this committee to speak about H.R. 1599, Safe and Accurate Food Labeling Act of 2015? Seeing, excuse me, the gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I just seek a point of personal.
Yes, sir.
And that is just to introduce Professor Williams Youngcomb, who is a fellow with me and a professor at the University of Arkansas, and he came to give a look-see at what we do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Professor, thank you very much. I know you're hog wild about being here, but we appreciate you taking time to do that.
Mr. Chairman.
The chair will now be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Does the gentleman seek time?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
And also a note of personal privilege, and also keeping it in the SEC. I have my ag intern here at Rules today. She came. She'd been following this issue, and Casey will be returning at the end of next week. She's over here in the corner. But she has been a great help. She's from White County, a good farm girl, and we're excited to have her, and she's been a great help in everything that we've done on the ag this year and representing the University of Georgia well. Go Dogs.
Thank you very much. It's good to have a gentlewoman from Georgia around here, and we're delighted, Daisy, that you're here. Does any other member seek time? Seeing none, the gentlewoman.
I do.
Excuse me.
Do.
The gentlewoman from New York.
I'd like a point of personal privilege to wish happy birthday to Hugh.
Oh, look at
today.
that. Hugh, happy birthday.
Right. For he's a jolly good fellow.
You know, he darn sure is, and I made sure I talked with him from early this morning. He wants me to leave him alone so he can go home and celebrate with his family. But Hugh, as you have heard, congratulations. You made it. You made it. Anything else from our membership?
I'll ask unanimous consent to waive the formal reading of the rule.
Without objection, we will now move. Is there amendment or discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have amendment. I move the committee grant H.R. 1599 and H.R. 1734 each an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bills on the floor.
Now heard the motion from the gentlewoman from New York. Discussion, further discussion.
These are terribly important bills having to do with food safety and things that we all care very much about. And I think it would be only fair to allow more than just a few people the ability to speak on them.
Further
so I
discussion.
ask for a yes vote on the amendment.
Yes, ma'am. Further discussion. Seeing none, those in favor of the slaughter amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No. Roll
Those have
call,
no say.
please.
Gentlewoman ask for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox? No. Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Stivers? Mr. Stivers, no. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion, seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Ayes have it, ayes have it.
Roll call, please.
Gentlewoman asks for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox?
Aye.
Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Stivers? Mr. Stivers, aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, aye. Ms. Slaughter?
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
Thank you very much. Motion is agreed to. Without objection, I'm going to add the rule as was written into the record based upon the request that we accept that without the reading. Without objection, that'll be entered. The gentleman, Mr. Byrne, the motion passes. Thank you very much. The gentleman, Mr. Byrne, will manage the rule for Republicans.
Mr. McGovern for the minority.
Mr. McGovern, we plan to meet tomorrow at 4:30 on HR 3009. So same bat channel, same bat time. Thank you very much. Welcome back. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.